The weapon that shouldn't work. The room was eerily silent, except for the occasional hum of alien technology. It was an interrogation chamber, cold and sterile, illuminated by a pale bluish light. Seated in the center was an alien commander, his slender, gray-skinned fingers gingerly holding the strange object they had confiscated from a human soldier. The weapon was crude by their standards, a clunky metallic artifact that seemed more at home in a museum than on a battlefield. "This is one of theirs," Commander Xi asked, his elongated fingers tracing the contours of the weapon's barrel. His voice carried an air of disbelief. The metal was rough, cold, and unrefined, stinging his skin as if it resisted his touch. It was unlike the smooth, polished plasma rifles used by his species, the Corazon Empire, which prided itself on technological superiority. "Yes, Commander," one of his subordinates confirmed. The subordinate, a stocky alien with a short, armored frame, looked visibly uncomfortable. "It's called an AK-47. A projectile weapon. Primitive. Obsolete. Yet effective." Xilith's wide, black eyes narrowed. "Effective? You're telling me this piece of junk managed to penetrate our soldiers' armor?" The subordinate shifted nervously, his armored plates clicking softly. "Yes, Commander. The humans. They seem to have mastered the art of using their simplicity against us." Xilith scoffed, turning the weapon over in his hands. "Simplicity. This thing is archaic. It fires chunks of metal, does it not? How could it possibly stand against our plasma shields?" The subordinate hesitated, unsure how to explain what he had witnessed. "Commander, the humans, their weapons don't rely on energy the way ours do. They're immune to power disruptions, EMP strikes, and even extreme weather conditions. They just work." Xilith's spindly fingers paused over the trigger mechanism. He had heard rumors from the front lines, whispers of human soldiers repelling elite Corazon units with laughably outdated technology. He dismissed the rumors as exaggerations, the kind of tall tales soldiers told to mask their failures. But now, holding the weapon in his hands, he felt a growing unease. What kind of species would cling to such barbaric tools? And more importantly, why were they winning? First contact with the AK-47. The story of humanity's stupidest weapon began on a remote colony world on the edge of Corazon territory. The planet, designated Terra 5, was a newly established human settlement with minimal defenses. When the Corazon fleet descended upon it, they expected an easy victory. Instead, they found themselves embroiled in a brutal, drawn-out conflict. Captain Elise Morgan, the leader of the human resistance on Terra 5, stood atop a makeshift barricade, her AK-47 slung over her shoulder. The weapon was old, a relic from Earth's 20th century, but it was reliable. It had been her grandfather's rifle, passed down through generations, and it had seen more battles than most of the Corazon fleet combined. "They're coming again," her second-in-command, Surgeon Diaz, reported, peering through a pair of battered binoculars. "Another wave. Plasma tanks this time." Elise nodded grimly. The Corazon never learned. They relied too heavily on their advanced technology, assuming it would guarantee victory. What they didn't understand was that humanity's strength lay in its adaptability, and its stubborn refusal to die quietly. "Spread out," Elise ordered. "Focus fire on the tank's joints. Aim for anything that looks like it moves." Her soldiers nodded, their faces set with determination. They didn't have energy shields or advanced targeting systems. What they had were rifles, grit, and an intimate knowledge of guerrilla warfare. As the alien tanks rumbled closer, the human defenders opened fire, the crack of their weapons echoing across the battlefield. The first signs of doubt. The Corazon commander overseeing the assault watched the battle unfold from the safety of his orbital command ship. He expected a quick victory, a surgical strike to eliminate the human resistance. Instead, he was greeted by chaos. His tanks, designed to withstand the most advanced plasma-based weaponry, were being systematically dismantled by tiny chunks of metal. How is this possible? The commander growled, his mandibles clicking in frustration. What are they using? Primitive projectile weapons, sir, his tactical officer replied. But they're targeting weak points in our armor. It's effective. Effective. The commander's voice rose in pitch. You mean to tell me these apes are using outdated weapons to destroy our state-of-the-art machinery? The tactical officer hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. Their weapons are surprisingly versatile. They don't rely on energy, so they're immune to our usual countermeasures. And their soldiers, they're relentless. The commander clenched his claws, his frustration mounting. This wasn't how the war was supposed to go. The Corzon were the galaxy's most advanced species. They had conquered countless worlds, assimilating or annihilating any who opposed them. Yet here they were, being humiliated by a backwater species wielding relics. The weapon's true nature. Back in the interrogation chamber, Commander Khalith continued to study the AK-47. He pressed a small button, ejecting the magazine. Inside were metallic cartridges, each containing a tiny explosive charge and a lead projectile. Ingenious, he muttered, despite himself. The simplicity of the design was almost elegant. No energy cells, no complex circuitry, just a mechanism that harnessed chemical energy to propel a projectile. It was a weapon that could function anywhere, under any conditions. No wonder the humans clung to it. He reinserted the magazine and handed the weapon to his subordinate. Prepare a demonstration. I want to see this. AK-47 in action. The subordinate nodded and left the room, leaving Xylith alone with his thoughts. For the first time, he felt a flicker of doubt. Perhaps the humans weren't as primitive as they seemed. Perhaps their reliance on simplicity was a strength, not a weakness. The first demonstration. When the demonstration began, Xylith watched intently as one of his soldiers fired the AK-47 at a series of targets. The weapon's recoil was fierce, its report deafening. Yet it was undeniably effective. The projectiles tore through the targets with ease, their kinetic energy devastating even at long range. The alien soldiers murmured among themselves, their expressions a mix of awe and unease. They had always believed their plasma weapons were the pinnacle of technological advancement. But this was something else. A weapon that didn't rely on energy, that couldn't be disabled by EMP strikes or power disruptions. It was a weapon that could endure. Alith felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had created something that defied conventional logic, a weapon that was both simple and unstoppable. And now, it was up to him to figure out how to counter it, before it was too late. The weapon that refuses to fail. Commander Xylith couldn't shake the uneasy feeling lingering in his chest. The AK-47, that crude yet resilient artifact, haunted his thoughts long after the demonstration ended. It was unlike any weapon he had encountered in his long career. The Corzon prided themselves on elegance, precision, and the raw power of their plasma technology. This human contraption, by contrast, was loud, rugged, and unrefined, yet devastatingly effective. Xylith reclined in his command chair, staring at the holographic display of Terra 5. The human colony had become a stain on the Corzon's otherwise flawless expansion record. His forces should have crushed the settlement weeks ago. Instead, his soldiers were bogged down in an infuriating guerrilla conflict, suffering losses at the hands of fighters armed with weapons centuries behind Corzon technology. The worst part, the human weapons didn't seem to break. Battlefield malfunctions. On the front lines, the Corzon forces experienced mounting frustration. Plasma rifles overheated in the sweltering heat of Terra 5's deserts. Sophisticated targeting systems malfunctioned after heavy storms. Advanced kinetic armor, thought to be impervious, began to buckle under relentless barrages of lead projectiles. I need a replacement for this. One Corzon soldier growled, tossing his plasma rifle to the ground. The weapon hissed and sparked, its energy cell flickering erratically. Nearby, a human sniper watched from a rocky outcrop, his breath calm and measured. Sergeant Diaz had been trailing this Corzon patrol for hours, waiting for the right moment. As the alien soldier fumbled with his gear, Diaz exhaled and squeezed the trigger of his weathered rifle. The shot cracked across the valley. The alien dropped instantly. His comrades scattered for cover, firing wildly in all directions. Diaz vanished back into the brush, already on the move. His rifle, an M24 bolt-action sniper rifle, had never failed him, despite being nearly a century old. The Corzon's growing concern. In the war room aboard the flagship Icaros, Commander Khalith reviewed battle reports with narrowed eyes. Every encounter followed a similar pattern. Human forces, vastly outnumbered and outgunned, emerged victorious. At first, the commander dismissed it as sheer luck. But now, with mounting casualties, he realized there was more at play. "Explain this," Khalith demanded, slamming his clawed hand onto the holographic display. "How does a handful of humans armed with ancient firearms manage to destroy entire battalions of Corzon warriors?" The tactical officer beside him hesitated, his mandibles twitching nervously. "Commander, the humans, they exploit our weaknesses. Plasma weapons require delicate calibration, and in prolonged engagements, the energy cells fail. Their projectile weapons are not bound by such limitations." Khalith's glare hardened. "You mean to tell me our cutting-edge weapons are being outmatched by lead and gunpowder?" "Yes, Commander. The humans use this simplicity to their advantage. EMP blasts do nothing to their guns. Harsh environments only enhance their effectiveness. And worse, they repair their weapons with basic tools. A human soldier can fix a rifle with little more than scrap metal and determination." Khalith leaned back, tenting his fingers. "We underestimated them," he muttered. Alien replication efforts. Desperate to counter humanity's unexpected success, Khalith ordered his engineers to reverse engineer the AK-47. Within days, the Corzon Research Division produced a prototype, an alien hybrid, blending ballistic technology with plasma enhancement. The weapon was sleek, powerful, and visually superior to its human counterpart. The Corzon called it the XK-9 suppressor. Khalith himself oversaw the weapon's first deployment. Elite soldiers were equipped with the XK-9, and confidence soared. The Corzon believed the tides had turned, but the battlefield proved otherwise. The XK-9's fatal flaw. The first engagement was a disaster. In the humid jungles of Terra 5, the XK-9 soldiers advanced on a human stronghold. On paper, the weapon's fusion of plasma and kinetic force should have decimated the humans. In reality, the XK-9 malfunctioned within minutes. Plasma cartridges overheated, causing catastrophic misfires. The soldiers wielding them were left defenseless as human bullets rained down from above. One alien stumbled into the dirt, his XK-9 sparking uselessly. A human soldier approached cautiously, lifting his AK-47 with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "Fancy gear you've got there," the human muttered, tapping the side of the alien's broken weapon. "Too complicated for its own good." The alien, breathing heavily, stared at the AK-47 in the human's hands. It was scratched and worn, but fully functional. His gaze flicked back to his own sleek, useless weapon. "Simple," the alien rasped, his eyes reflecting the flames of the battlefield. "Yours, simple." A shift in perspective. Word of the engagement spread quickly through the Corzon ranks. Soldiers began to view the AK-47 not as a primitive relic, but as a symbol of resilience. Some secretly collected human weapons from the battlefield, hoping to wield them in future skirmishes. Khalith, upon hearing this, grew in rage. He ordered the destruction of any confiscated human firearms. But the soldiers whispered in the shadows, and rumors circulated of entire battalions defecting, armed with scavenged AK-47s. The smugglers' market. In the outer colonies, Corzon smugglers began trading human rifles on the black market. A single AK-47 fetched absurd prices. Entire underground syndicates emerged, specializing in the acquisition and distribution of human weapons. 2 crates of plasma cells, one smuggler offered, lifting an AK-47 from beneath his cloak. Or one of these. Galactic watched this growing market with disdain. Yet, deep down, he understood the appeal. It's not just a weapon, he whispered to himself in his quarters one night, the dim light casting long shadows across the AK-47 on his desk. It's a testament to survival. The growing insurgency. As Corzon forces faltered, human colonies expanded. The war shifted into humanity's favor, not because of superior numbers or advanced technology, but because of a simple truth. Sometimes, the most straightforward solutions were the most enduring. Commander Galactic knew that the war's outcome would soon be decided, but the question lingered. Could an empire built on complexity survive a race armed with simplicity? The AK-47, the stupidest weapon he had ever seen, held the answer. The turning point. The air on Terra 5 crackled with tension. Smoke drifted lazily across the battlefield, hanging like a shroud over the alien wreckage. The humans had claimed yet another victory. A small ragtag force armed with outdated ballistic weapons had repelled one of the most technologically advanced militaries in the galaxy. Commander Galactic stared at the after-action reports in disbelief. His soldiers, equipped with state-of-the-art plasma rifles and mechanized battle armor, were being systematically dismantled by farmers, miners, and off-world settlers wielding firearms so primitive they could have been considered antiques. It made no sense. How did this happen? Galactic's voice trembled with barely contained rage as he addressed his officers. I gave you elite battalions. I gave you cutting-edge weapons. And yet, here we stand, humiliated. Silence filled the command room. No one dared to speak. Galactic's eyes burned as he stared at the holographic display of Terra 5, the planet flickering in shades of blue and red. Red marked Corzon forces. The patches of blue, small and scattered, represented the human colonies. But those patches weren't shrinking. They were growing. The ambush in the ridges. 3 days earlier, a battalion of Corzon soldiers had marched through the northern ridges of Terra 5, heading toward the human settlement of Blackthorn. Recon reports suggested the colony was lightly defended, a perfect opportunity for a decisive strike. Lieutenant Sakor led the battalion, his confidence swelling as he envisioned the promotion awaiting him after the inevitable victory. But as his troops entered the canyon, the ambush began. From the rocky ledges above, human fighters unleash a relentless barrage. The crack of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, mingling with the shouts of alien soldiers caught in the crossfire. The Corzon, expecting energy-based combat, were ill-prepared for the rain of bullets. Cover! Sakor roared, diving behind a boulder. Plasma bolts lanced upward in return fire, but the humans remained hidden, their shots precise and unrelenting. One by one, Corzon soldiers fell. Plasma shields designed to repel energy blasts were useless against the raw kinetic force of human bullets. Sakor's second-in-command, Rel, crouched beside him. Panic etched across his face. Sir, our weapons are overheating. They weren't meant for prolonged engagements. Sakor gritted his teeth, his plasma rifle sparking in his hands. He activated his communicator. Command, this is Lieutenant Sakor. We're under heavy attack. Request immediate reinforcement. Static. Then a voice crackled through the receiver, laced with cold amusement. No reinforcements, Lieutenant. Hold your ground. It was Captain Elise Morgan, the leader of the human resistance. The line went dead. The simplicity of resilience. When the battle ended, fewer than a dozen Corzon soldiers escaped the ridges. Sakor was not among them. News of the defeat spread rapidly. The Corzon soldiers, already demoralized, began to lose faith in their leadership. Whispers circulated. Humans were wielding weapons that refused to fail, weapons impervious to the heat, dust, and electronic interference plaguing the battlefield. Exodolith overheard two of his officers speaking in hushed tones. "Their rifles. They just keep firing. No plasma recharge, no overheating. They don't even jam." Exodolith interrupted sharply. "Are you suggesting our empire is being undone by rifles that shoot bits of metal?" The officer hesitated but nodded. "Yes, Commander. I fear we are." The defector's tale. Exodolith's frustration boiled over until, one evening, he found himself face to face with an unexpected visitor, a captured Corzon soldier who had defected to the human side. The defector stood tall, his armor stripped away and replaced with human military fatigues. A worn AK-47 hung loosely at his side, the symbol of his betrayal. "Why?" Exodolith demanded, pacing furiously. "Why side with the humans? Have you no loyalty to your people?" The defector's eyes met Exodolith's without flinching. "I fought for the Corzon for decades," he said. "But on Terra 5, I learned something our empire has forgotten." Exodolith narrowed his eyes. "And what is that?" The defector lifted the AK-47, running his fingers over the battered steel. "Simplicity. Resilience. The humans don't need sophisticated technology. They survive because they adapt. When our weapons fail, theirs endure." Exodolith scoffed. "You betray your people for nostalgia." The defector shook his head. "No, Commander. I betray them because I wish to be on the winning side." The fall of Blackthorn. Days later, Exodolith ordered another assault on Blackthorn. This time, he led the attack personally. The Corzon descended upon the settlement with overwhelming force, plasma cannons, aerial bombardments, and armored infantry. Buildings crumbled under the assault, and the skies burned with fire. But the humans held firm. From the rubble, fighters emerged, rifles in hand. They fired relentlessly, cutting down Corzon troops with mechanical precision. It was a battle of attrition, and as the hours wore on, Exodolith realized the horrifying truth. His forces were losing. An explosion rocked the ground near him, and Exodolith found himself on his knees, coughing through the dust. In the distance, he saw her, Captain Elise Morgan, standing atop a fallen Corzon tank, AK-47 in hand. Their eyes met, and she raised the rifle in a mock salute. Exodolith's rage flared. But beneath the anger was something darker. Fear. A new understanding. By the time the Corzon retreated from Blackthorn, Exodolith's belief in his empire's invincibility had shattered. As he sat alone in his quarters that night, he picked up the AK-47 confiscated from the battlefield. The metal felt cold and heavy in his hands. Simple, unrefined, yet it had brought an empire to its knees. And perhaps, Exodolith realized, that simplicity was exactly why the humans were winning. The Alien Civil War. Commander Exodolith stood at the edge of the observation deck, staring down at the rows of Corzon soldiers drilling beneath him. The rhythmic stomp of their boots filled the air, but the familiar sound no longer brought him comfort. The war was no longer just between the Corzon Empire and humanity. The seeds of doubt, planted by humanity's baffling success, had begun to sprout within the empire itself. What started as whispers had grown into loud, irrepressible murmurs. The AK-47 had become the symbol of defiance, resilience, and, to Exodolith's dismay, rebellion. A divided military. The first signs of internal discord surfaced after the Second Battle of Blackthorn. Units that had suffered humiliating defeats began scavenging human weapons from the battlefield. Plasma rifles and energy-based technology were discarded in favor of crude human firearms. It started as a survival tactic, but it didn't end there. Entire battalions began defecting, smuggling AK-47s and other ballistic weapons into their ranks. Commanders loyal to the Corzon High Command dismissed it as desperation, until those same defectors started winning. Planet Ferric 9. Outer Corzon territory. The Civil War's first shot came during a routine inspection. Commander Rel, Once a loyal officer under Xalith, had been stationed on Varric 9 to oversee occupation efforts. When reinforcements arrived to relieve him, they found the planetary defenses manned by his soldiers, armed not with plasma rifles, but with human firearms. When asked to explain himself, Rel's response was brief. "We fight with weapons that work. If you wish to take this planet, bring more than words." The Corzon reinforcements hesitated. Not a single shot was fired. Varric 9 was declared lost without bloodshed. The growing shadow. Back on the flagship Ikaros, Xalith paced as reports flooded in. Varric 9 was not an isolated incident. Other Outer Rim worlds followed, defecting under similar circumstances. Even among the Loyalist forces, distrust festered. The defectors believe these weapons grant them immunity. General Kotor growled during a War Council meeting. His clawed hands rested heavily on the table, frustration clear on his face. "They say that if they fight like humans, they will survive like humans." "They're fools," another officer sneered. "Let them cling to their ancient relics. We will burn them down with superior technology." Xalith said nothing. His gaze lingered on the holographic map of Corzon space, the blue patches representing the growing defectors blending too closely with the human-controlled territories. "Commander Xalith." Kotor's voice broke the silence. Xalith finally spoke, his voice cold and sharp. "Have any of you ever held one of their rifles?" Kotor's mandibles twitched. "Of course not. I refuse to handle such primitive garbage." Xalith slowly turned to face the general, his eyes narrowing. "I have." The room grew still. Xalith continued, walking slowly around the table. "I watched as our plasma rifles overheated. I saw our most advanced weapons rendered useless in storms, deserts, and frozen tundras. And I held an AK-47 in my own hands, after the soldier carrying it shot down 5 of our warriors without pause." He stopped, placing his hand firmly on the table. "Do not mistake simplicity for weakness." The weapons appeal. Curiosity about human firearms spread like wildfire. Within weeks, defectors began customizing their own variants of the AK-47. Plasma cores were replaced with mechanical firing pins. Ballistic cartridges, long considered obsolete, were manufactured in secret. Even high-ranking officers discreetly requested human weapons under the guise of research. One defector, Captain Velas, famously modified his AK-47 by embedding the handle of his plasma sword into the stock. The weapon fired bullets by day and crackled with energy by night, a hybrid of human ingenuity and Corzon craftsmanship. The resulting creation was dubbed the Reaper's Fang. Battle of the Twin Moons. When civil war erupted in earnest, the Battle of the Twin Moons marked the turning point. A detachment of Corzon loyalists, armed with plasma cannons and mechanized walkers, attempted to seize control of a manufacturing colony producing human-style weapons. They were met by a defector force armed exclusively with AK-47s and other human ballistics. The battlefield stretched across the surface of 2 orbiting moons, and for 3 days, gunfire echoed between them. Plasma blasts illuminated the sky, but for every cannon fired, 10 bullets answered. By the 3rd day, the plasma cannons grew silent. The walkers, disabled by human-like sabotage tactics, lay scattered across the craters, their pilots surrendering. When the dust settled, the defectors stood victorious, clutching weapons that by all logic shouldn't have won. The psychological impact. The implications rippled through Corzon space. Loyalist troops began questioning their orders. If their advanced technology could be outperformed by outdated firearms, then what else had they misjudged? Moral decay seeped into the Empire's core. Soldiers hesitated to fire their plasma weapons in fear they would malfunction, while defectors pressed forward with confidence, clutching their reliable battle-worn rifles. It became a war of belief as much as a war of weapons. The defectors, armed with relics of humanity's past, believed in victory. The loyalists, with their advanced but fragile technology, began to doubt their chances. Xalith's dilemma. In the quiet of his chambers, Hexalith examined the AK-47 confiscated from Blackthorn. He could feel it, the weight of history. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a philosophy. A symbol that power didn't always stem from advancement, but from persistence, from grit, from the ability to endure. His fingers traced the scratches along the barrel, each mark a testament to battles fought and won. There in the silence, he realized the truth. The Empire was already losing. Not because of firepower, but because humanity had ignited something far more dangerous. An idea. And no empire could outgun an idea. Humanity's greatest strength. The war was no longer fought in the outer colonies or distant fringe worlds. It had crept into the heart of the Corzon Empire itself. Cities once bastions of Corzon dominance now flickered with unrest. The once pristine banners of the Empire hung tattered over defecting sectors, and skirmishes broke out between loyalist forces and insurgent factions, wielding crude but effective ballistic weapons. Commander Hexalith sat at the helm of the Ikaros, orbiting the Corzon homeworld. From the observation deck, he gazed out at the stars, each point of light, a reminder of the expanding territories slipping from his control. In his hand rested the AK-47, a trophy of war that had become a symbol of everything wrong with the Empire's philosophy. The cost of arrogance. It had been 2 weeks since the fall of Varric 9, and the ripple effects could no longer be contained. Loyalist factions defected in droves, and smuggler rings flourished as entire Corzon battalions sought out human ballistic weapons. Plasma weapons, the pride of the Empire, were being discarded. Hexalith's claws drummed against the rifle's worn surface. This single weapon, mass-produced centuries ago by human hands, had become a cultural phenomenon within his own military. Soldiers trusted it more than the cutting-edge firearms issued by their empire. And in their trust lay the seed of rebellion. General Kotor stood across from him, mandibles twitching in frustration. "Commander, we cannot let this weapon undermine the Empire any longer. We must outlaw the possession of human arms. Immediate confiscation, executions if necessary." Hexalith's black eyes narrowed. "Outlawing the weapons won't solve the problem. Kotor, you cannot suppress an idea with mandates and fire." "It's not just an idea, sir," Kotor pressed. "It's survival. The soldiers trust these weapons because they work. They don't overheat, they don't jam, and they can fire in conditions that would destroy our plasma rifles." Hexalith exhaled sharply. "I know." For days, he had debated dismantling the insurgency by force, leading the charge himself if necessary. But deep down, Hexalith recognized the futility in that path. For every weapon confiscated, 10 more would slip through the cracks. You cannot dismantle what is already stronger than you. The siege of Helion Prime. As Hexalith pondered his next move, the Empire's most secure stronghold, Helion Prime, fell under siege. Helion Prime, the industrial heart of the Corzon Empire, was known for its advanced manufacturing facilities. Shielded by orbital defenses and garrisons of elite plasma-wielding soldiers, it was thought to be impenetrable. But the insurgents didn't strike from orbit. They came from within. Entire Corzon regiments defected overnight, using human ballistic weapons smuggled into the facility. By morning, Helion Prime's towering factories burned, and its automated plasma turrets stood silent, their operators having abandoned them for human rifles scavenged from the black market. When Hexalith arrived with reinforcements, he expected chaos. Instead, he found order. Corzon defectors patrolling the streets with worn AK-47s slung over their shoulders, directing traffic and protecting civilians. It wasn't anarchy. It was revolution. Face to face with the enemy. Hexalith descended from the Ikaros to negotiate the return of Helion Prime. There at the city gates stood Captain Elise Morgan, the human commander responsible for spearheading the defense of Terra 5, and the woman whose forces had crippled his empire time and again. Elise leaned casually against the ruins of a plasma turret, her AK-47 resting lazily across her chest. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she called, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Exalith approached, his expression unreadable. His gaze flicked to the rifle she carried, the very same weapon model that had spread like wildfire across his empire. "You've done more damage to my people with that relic," Exalith said coldly, "than our enemies have in 100 cycles." Elise chuckled. "Funny thing about relics, Commander, they last." Her words hung heavily between them. Exalith studied her carefully. Despite the disparity in their technology, humanity had resisted extermination, not through superior firepower, but through resilience, adaptability, and sheer force of will. The lesson was glaringly clear: the strength of simplicity. As negotiations stretched into the evening, Exalith found himself sitting opposite Elise in the heart of the city. Around them, Corzon defectors and human fighters mingled, sharing meals, laughter, and stories. The lines between victor and vanquished blurred. "How did you know this would work?" Exalith asked, gesturing toward the crowd. Elise took a long breath before responding. "I didn't. We just played to our strengths. Your empire thrives on complexity. Ours survives on simplicity." Exalith frowned. "But simplicity shouldn't win against superior technology." Elise shrugged. "Maybe. But it wasn't just about weapons. Your soldiers lost faith in plasma rifles because they saw something better, something they could rely on, even in the worst conditions." She tapped the stock of her AK-47 meaningfully. "Sometimes the best tool isn't the most advanced. It's the one that never lets you down." Exalith sat in silence, the truth sinking in deeper than he cared to admit. The shifting tide. In the months that followed, the Corzon Empire changed in ways Exalith had never anticipated. Plasma weapon production slowed, while ballistic weapons, modeled after human designs, became the new standard for defecting and loyalist troops alike. Corzon engineers stopped scoffing at humanity's inventions. Instead, they studied them, adapting their rugged simplicity into starship engines, armor plating, and medical equipment. The war with humanity didn't end in surrender or destruction. It ended in integration. Legacy of the AK-47. Years later, Exalith visited Terra 5, now a thriving trade hub shared between humans and Corzon defectors. The symbol of the old war remained, mounted proudly in the settlement's central square. An AK-47, battered and worn, displayed under glass. A plaque beneath it read, "The simplest weapon that saved the galaxy." Exalith stared at the rifle for a long time, reflecting on the countless lives it had changed. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Stupidest weapon I've ever seen." And yet, he wouldn't have wanted it any other way. The final stand. The galaxy held its breath as the Corzon Civil War reached its boiling point. On one side stood the Loyalists, clinging desperately to their plasma-based technology and ancient doctrines of superiority. On the other, the defectors, soldiers and commanders who had embraced human simplicity, their ranks swelling with insurgents wielding ballistic weapons scavenged or smuggled from the black market. And at the center of this conflict loomed Corvallis, the gleaming capital of the Corzon Empire, a fortress world wrapped in layers of orbital defenses and patrolled by fleets of advanced warships. Corvallis was considered untouchable. For millennia, it had been the symbol of the Corzon's dominance across the stars. Now, it was the final battleground. The defectors' gamble. Commander Exalith stood aboard the bridge of the Icaros, watching as the defector fleet gathered in the void beyond Corvallis. From this vantage point, the rebel ships appeared as little more than silhouettes against the distant glow of the capital planet. But Exalith knew better than to underestimate them. Unlike the Loyalist warships, sleek and brimming with plasma cannons, the defector fleet was a strange patchwork of retrofitted freighters, stolen Loyalist cruisers, and even salvaged human vessels, armed with kinetic railguns and rudimentary mass drivers. Crude, unrefined. And yet, there was power in their simplicity. "Commander, the fleet is ready," General Kator, no longer a loyalist, reported. His armor had been stripped of its golden insignia, replaced by the plain, scratched plating worn by all defector forces. Across his chest, an ancient human bandolier held a row of ballistic magazines. Lith's gaze shifted to the moon-sized orbital station protecting Corvallis. The Crucible, it was called, an impenetrable bastion of plasma turrets, particle shields, and gravity wells designed to crush any fleet that approached. But the defectors weren't relying on technological superiority. They were relying on chaos. The battle begins. The first salvo came not from the defector fleet, but from within the Loyalist ranks. Halfway through routine orbital patrol, battleship Vraska 9 turned its cannons on the nearest Loyalist destroyer and fired, obliterating it in a rain of plasma and steel. Moments later, the defector fleet surged forward, unleashing a relentless barrage of kinetic fire. Bullets, missiles, and railgun slugs sliced through the void, overwhelming the Loyalists' plasma shields. Energy barriers designed to withstand plasma bursts struggled to absorb the raw kinetic force, and one by one, Loyalist warships began to fall. On the ground, the battle erupted in the streets of Corvallis itself. Defector units, armed with human weapons, fought Loyalist shock troopers in brutal close-quarters combat. Every alley, every rooftop, and every corridor became a war zone, the last line of defense. Despite their losses, the Loyalists rallied behind the dreadnought Valarax, a warship twice the size of any other in the fleet. Its plasma cannons were capable of decimating entire cities in a single barrage. As the defector fleet pressed closer to Corvallis, the Valarax began its slow descent into the planet's atmosphere. Its cannons trained on the largest defector outpost, the primary foothold in the capital. From the bridge of the Akaros, Xylith watched as the Valarax's weapons powered up, molten plasma pooling at the tips of its cannons. If the dreadnought fired, the defector's hold on Corvallis would crumble. General Kator, Xylith said quietly, "Prepare the boarding teams." Kator blinked. "You're boarding the Valarax? That's suicide." Xylith's eyes narrowed. "Not if we bring the right weapons." Into the beast's belly, the boarding craft hurtled through the stormy skies of Corvallis, weaving through anti-air fire as the defector forces engaged the dreadnought from all sides. Xylith stood at the front of the drop bay, gripping an AK-47 with both hands. Around him, his soldiers carried ballistic weapons of every kind: AK-47s, N-16s, bolt-action rifles. Human firearms gathered and replicated over months of conflict. The defectors weren't just bringing firepower aboard the Valarax. They were bringing faith. The dropship pierced through the dreadnought's hull, its landing thrusters scorching the metal beneath as the boarding ramp hissed open. Xylith led the charge, his AK-47 roaring as bullets tore through Loyalist guards, scrambling to intercept them. The corridors of the Valarax lit up with fire. Loyalist plasma bolts sliced through the air, but the defectors' bullets, hot, fast, and unrelenting, cut them down before they could regroup. As they stormed the ship's bridge, Xylith's rifle clicked dry. Without hesitation, he ejected the magazine, slamming another into place. Simple, efficient, deadly. Turning the tide. By the time Xylith reached the command deck, the Valarax's plasma cannons were seconds away from firing on the capital below. Captain Elise Morgan's voice crackled over the comms. "You better move fast. We don't have long." Xylith didn't respond. He raised his AK-47 and fired 3 shots into the dreadnought's primary reactor console. Sparks erupted as the control systems flickered and died. The cannons fell silent. Outside, the defector fleet cheered as the Valarax began to drift, smoke pouring from its hull. The Empire falls. With the Valarax disabled, the Loyalist fleet scattered. Corvallis fell within hours, and the once mighty Empire fractured into dozens of independent systems. When the dust settled, the defectors stood victorious, not because of superior firepower, but because of their unshakable belief in the power of simple, reliable weapons. In the heart of the defector capital, the AK-47 that Stalith had carried into battle was enshrined in glass, a reminder of the day the greatest empire in the galaxy was brought to its knees, not by plasma or energy, but by lead and steel. A new era. The stars burned brightly over Corvallis, casting a soft glow over a planet once torn by war. Now the capital world was quiet, its skies no longer filled with streaking plasma fire or the thunder of warships. Instead, trade vessels and transports drifted lazily through the atmosphere, carrying supplies, settlers, and representatives of worlds once considered enemies. At the heart of the planet stood Unity Plaza, a sprawling square rebuilt from the ruins of the old Loyalist Palace. Where once towering statues of Corzon emperors stood, now stood something different. A simple glass case. Inside it rested the same battered AK-47 that Commander Xalith had wielded during the final assault on the Valrax dreadnought, the weapon that had symbolized the collapse of an empire and the rise of something new. Xalith stood before the case, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. Ironic, came a voice from behind him. Xalith didn't turn. He already recognized the voice. Captain Elise Morgan stepped beside him, hands tucked behind her back, wearing a worn combat jacket that had seen more battles than most soldiers could survive. Her rifle, a modernized yet familiar AK variant, was slung across her shoulder, ever present even in peacetime. Xalith exhaled softly. "I never thought our legacy would boil down to this," he admitted. "Not plasma cannons, dreadnoughts, or planetary siege weapons. But this." He tapped the glass lightly, the AK-47 within rattling faintly against its mount. A relic, a primitive tool. Elisa's lips curled into a faint smile. Primitive tools built empires before, Xalith. Ours just happened to dismantle one. A galaxy in transition. The fall of the Corzon Empire didn't usher in chaos. In fact, what followed was something neither the defectors nor humanity had anticipated, a golden age of cooperation. With the empire fractured, former loyalist systems sought unity, forging trade routes with human colonies. In the absence of oppressive plasma-based hierarchies, new industries arose, industries built on simplicity, sustainability, and reliability. Human engineers taught Corzon defectors how to produce firearms en masse, while defectors shared the secrets of energy-efficient starship designs. The two societies didn't just coexist. They thrived. Ships that once sailed under different flags now bore the insignia of the Interstellar Union. A coalition formed not through conquest, but through mutual respect and shared struggle. Yet even as technology advanced and star systems connected like never before, one thing remained constant. Ballistic weapons endured. The smuggler's legacy. Years later, an old smuggler stood outside a bar on the outer rim of the galaxy. His coat, tattered and worn, concealed a pistol strapped to his side, an antique revolver, centuries old but still functional. Inside, a group of Corzon youths sat at a table, passing around a sleek energy rifle that hummed softly with latent power. They argued over its merits, debating energy output and shield penetration. The smuggler chuckled to himself, shaking his head as he drew his revolver. With a slow, deliberate motion, he spun the cylinder and held the weapon up to the light. A bartender, human, noticed and raised an eyebrow. "Don't see many of those around anymore," she remarked. The smuggler smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised." The revolver clicked into place with a satisfying weight. Sometimes the old ways are the best. Diplomacy by bullet. In the far reaches of Corzon space, a diplomatic envoy prepared to meet with a breakaway colony that had rejected the Interstellar Union. The envoy's vessel was unarmed, standard for peace negotiations. But at the envoy's hip rested a simple firearm. The colony leader eyed the weapon warily during the meeting, noting its scratched barrel and faded wooden grip. "You bring a gun to peace talks?" the alien leader asked, shifting uncomfortably. The envoy smiled politely. It's not a weapon. It's a reminder. Of what? That sometimes peace is built by those who refuse to let their weapons fail. The colony leader considered the words carefully before nodding. The talks proceeded without incident, and by the end of the day, the breakaway colony signed its allegiance to the Union. The weapon never left its holster. The new generation. Back on Terra 5, a new generation of human and Corzon cadets trained together in academies scattered across the surface. The war that had once divided their species was now a shared lesson, an integral part of every curriculum. In one such training yard, an instructor held up two weapons to the recruits. In one hand, a sleek, newly designed plasma rifle capable of incinerating targets from great distances. In the other, an AK-47, battered and scarred, its wooden stock chipped from decades of use. The instructor addressed the cadets with a grin. "You'll learn to use both," she said, "but if your plasma rifle overheats, jams, or gets knocked offline by an EMP." She set the AK-47 down on the table with a loud thunk. "This one won't fail you, and that's why we still carry it." The cadets murmured, some nodding in recognition, others glancing at the rifle with quiet reverence. Even in peace, the weapon remained, a silent guardian against complacency. The legacy lives on. As Xylith and Elise stood in Unity Plaza, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the square. "The war changed us," Xylith admitted, watching the cadets practicing in the distance. "It forced us to rethink everything." Elise glanced at the rifle beneath the glass one last time. "It wasn't the war that changed us," she replied softly. "It was survival. The same thing that's driven every species since the dawn of time." Xylith considered this for a long moment, then chuckled. "You know," he mused, "when I first saw one of these, I thought it was the stupidest weapon I'd ever encountered." Elise grinned. "You weren't wrong. And yet," Xylith added, "it ended up saving us all." They stood in silence, two former enemies, now bound by the memory of a war fought not for conquest or power, but for the right to endure. And in the center of it all, beneath glass and steel, rested the simplest weapon the galaxy had ever known, the AK-47.